Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laos. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to Fake It Till You Make It. And yes, I am saying that with upspeak. For those of you that know me, I am always, of course, going to talk to you about speaking with conviction so that you say things in a declarative tone. But the reason why I'm saying upspeak at the end of that sentence and calling it a question, really, because it is a question. What do you do? How many of you believe in the fake it till you make it concept? I'm going to tell you a story about when I was 18. I sold Mary Kay Cosmetics and I did really well. I actually made quite a bit of money. Now, every Monday night, religiously, I would go to their sales and marketing meetings. And what they taught us is this concept, fake it till you make it. Now, while I prefer act as if now in my older age, but it really made an impression on me, especially as a young person, because what they said is you're never going to know every single detail about every product that we sell, but you have to act as if you do. And that's really where confidence comes in. Now, I am not saying be inauthentic. So please hear me when I say that. Definitely not about inauthentic. This is simply about, in a way, tricking your brain a little bit and stepping into it. And I'm going to give you 3 tips today, and we'll walk through each of those, or 3 themes. And I'm going to tell you what they are now, and then I'm going to walk through each of them. The first one is we have to trick our brains. Yes, that is my first key point. The second one is to be kind to yourself. And the third is to feel the fear and do it anyway. Let's start with another example. Another time, this is funny. I'm going to think about my friend Jay Manning in South Africa when I talk about this, but I was just telling you about when I was 18 selling the Mary Kay Cosmetics. The other thing is when I was 18, I remember walking into a ballroom dance studio because I was taking lessons there at Arthur Murray. If anybody remembers the Arthur Murray Dance Studios, I took dance classes there. I had somebody come up to me that was a client and asked me a question as if I was an instructor, and I said, "Oh, I don't work here. I'm just taking lessons." And he said, "Really? Wow, you sure act as if you do." The way I was walking, not the way I was, hopefully not acting, but point I want to make is it was the way that I walked in and carried myself. And if any of you have ever done ballroom dancing, you know what that's like. You've taught very much to start with posture and to carry yourself in a way that exudes confidence. So it was a really great time in my life where I had this combination of the Mary Kay, fake it till you make it, and then the ballroom dancing so that I really could, as I would say, step into my confidence. Now, some of you might know my story that it took me much longer than that to really feel like I could, without fear of disappointing people or being judged, all of these things that we tend to feel, or a lot of us often feel. It took me a lot longer in life to actually get to a point where I felt free of that. But back then, I still showed up and came across as confident. So I say that because there was still a lot of things that I didn't feel confident in, probably like a lot of you too. So that's important to remember. But the tricking our brain part, let's talk about that. A lot of people say, well, gosh, Karen, I don't know. I don't really talk that loud. For example, let's say I suggest that they speak a little bit louder. Well, a lot of people, or another thing that comes up is people will say, well, I'm just not a person that gestures very much. Well, it's not as if you have to completely change yourself. What we're really talking about here are just little nuances, just a baby step closer. So let's go with your voice, since every time we open our mouth, we use our voice. Specifically, I remember this person was saying, well, I just don't know. I don't know. I just I feel like I sound so loud and this isn't me. So, first of all, the biggest question that I have when I work with anybody is, well, the first is not a question. The first is try it and then listen back and watch it back on video. And then the question is, Which version of yourself do you like better? Particularly for the environment that you're in, that you want to influence people, that you want to come across as confident. So let's say you're trying to lead meetings better and you want to speak up more and show more of your gravitas and confidence. Well, you're going to have to speak a little bit louder than you normally do, most likely, if you want to change that habit. Now, I do want to say, sticking still on our first point about that whole concept of tricking your brain, sometimes it truly is a concept of where you have to just do it and act as if. That's where I come back to sometimes we have to step into something before we actually believe that it's happening. So that's one thing that we're talking about here is the belief component. The other thing is just doing it to see how it looks and hear how it sounds. And that's why I never want anybody to feel like they're faking something. But on the other hand, most of the time when we're changing any habit, we're going to feel like we're faking it. It's just the way changing habits works. So we've got to accept that reality if we truly do want to change some of these habits. One of the stories that I remember vividly from years back when I was reading a book, I don't even remember now, but it was about change. And it was a story about a guy who was a workaholic. And he said, I want to get to know my kids better, meaning he had little toddlers and he was worried that he was going to be working all the time because he would leave before in the morning before they woke up and he would go to bed or he'd come home and they would already be in bed. So his goal, again, for you, you got to think about what is your goal? What is the outcome that you want to have? His goal was to know his kids and not have them feel that he was some alienated dad that happened to live in their house. So he talked about how every night he would come home at 5 o'clock and be on the floor with his toddlers and the baby. And he said it felt so weird at first. He totally felt like a fraud. And what I think is also fascinating is that we don't hear too many men talking about imposter syndrome. And in fact, it plagues men just as much as it plagues women. Now, what was fascinating to me about that is that it felt so awkward to him, but he pushed through the awkwardness because he knew that on the other side of that awkwardness was the goal, and that was the commitment. For each of you, hopefully listening to this, your goal is to be a better communicator. And if that's your goal, then you might have to act as if for a little bit until you're truly experiencing it as just a regular habit in your life. So, how do we trick our brain? Let's talk about that. You've heard me talk about, if you've heard any of my other work, I talk a lot about this concept of anxious reappraisal that Allison Wood Brooks came up with in her work at Harvard. And she coined this term anxious reappraisal. The facts are that physiologically, there is no difference between our nervousness and our excitement. So, because that's a fact, physiologically, we have to trick our brain. Instead of saying, I'm so nervous, or I'm so afraid of giving this talk, or just anything, if you say, I'm so nervous, just change it and say, I'm so excited. I can't wait. This is going to be wonderful. Anything around that, but primarily excited. Change nervousness to excitement because your body doesn't know the difference. It's our brains that we need to shift. So that is my big suggestion with that. The other thing is be kind to yourself. This is number 2. The challenge when we're changing habits is we want to be perfect. It's just the way we are as human beings. We're high achievers. We want it now. We want speed and efficiency. But I got to remind you, you've spent your entire life getting the habits that you have now. You cannot expect that they're just going to magically change overnight listening to one podcast or doing a coaching session. We've got to have grace for ourselves. Be kind and recognize that progress takes time. But as this wonderful author, and I like to call him my friend. Everybody probably feels like they're friends with him, even if they don't know him personally. Bob Goff, who wrote a number of books, and one of them is called Love Does, and I believe his latest was called Dream Big. But he talks a lot about something now that I completely forgot. I was getting so caught up in Bob Goff. Yes, here it is. He talks about a quarter of a twist, that if you just make a little quarter of a twist shift towards something that you want, you're going to make progress. But we've got to recognize it's not like you're going to turn an entire ship in 1 minute, for example. I think we can totally grasp that. But when it comes to ourselves, we tend to want it to happen very quickly. So I want to remind you that those things are not necessarily going to happen quickly, but if you're consistent, you stay the course, and you take one baby step at a time every day, you plow forward, you are going to see a shift. Be kind. The third one is feel the fear and do it anyway. Fear comes up a lot for most of us. I want to start with, first of all, a couple of tips on this. It's easy to say, feel the fear and do it anyway. Well, you might say, well, Karen, I mean, that's not easy. Okay, and I get it. It's not easy. The thing to keep in mind is your compelling reason. Why do you want to change? No one changes anything unless they have a compelling reason to do it. You've got to recognize what that is, get in touch with that, and then keep that in mind. Whether it's a physical reminder, for some people, they love vision boards. I personally do love vision boards. For other people, it might be a mantra. Maybe there's a phrase that you like to use to keep your goal at the ready. But whatever it is, you've got to have that compelling reason very much available to you and in mind. Otherwise, it will be very easy to give up when the fear creeps in. Now, one of the things I recommend as an exercise, I want to give you a couple of these things. They're definitely integrated, is to make fear your friend. Now, first thing, naming your fears takes the power away. So I would suggest something called a fear script. That is where you truly act as if you are writing a script. You start with fear, saying whatever fear says to you. Maybe it's something like, well, who are you to be speaking up at this meeting? Who are you to be asking for this promotion? And it's that fear comes up, whatever it is, then you just write your response back to it. And you go back and forth, back and forth. What does fear say to your response? And then again, what is your response to that? And back and forth. And simply by diving into that, and I would recommend journaling because there is a real power to the written word, writing it down and then reading it back. And the more that you start realizing it, the more you and as you read and you go through, the more it does start to diminish the power. And it can separate you from fear itself, because so often we see our fear as integrated into our personalities. Well, on one hand, that might be true, but this is another way to trick your brain, going back to key point number one. It's simply making sure that you name it so that you can help to dilute the power. Another way that you can really do this, if you wanted to, is pick somebody that you trust, somebody safe in your life that you could share this fear script with. Maybe not all of the details, but talk to them about it. Talk about your fears. That's another way to keep them in relationship, because as human beings, we are wired for connection. And when you keep those fears in relationship, they also diminish the power, because suddenly you're sharing it with someone else and it's not just stuck in your brain or in your your emotions, because we are, again, holistic beings, all connected. So that's one exercise. Let's talk about another one. I was at a wonderful retreat a few years ago where we were encouraged to name our inner critic. Now, everybody's going to be different, but mine, I'm going to describe her and then I'm going to tell you her name. Well, I'll tell you her name. I'll introduce you to her now. Her name is Gertrude. She is very skinny. She's got long, scraggly gray hair that is all tied up in a big bun very tightly. She has wire framed glasses, the old fashioned kind that I guess now are probably in, but she has them and she's got them about halfway down her nose. And she has a clipboard in her hand with a pen. Every time as I walk around the world, there she is judging me, marking me off. Oh, did that wrong again. Oh, that wasn't perfect. And now it's so easy to just say, oh, Gertrude, I know you're trying to protect me, but I've got this. It's okay. You can relax. Now, it might sound a little bit funny. And I've talked to some of you that have said, oh, yeah, I've named my critic too. So I know I'm not alone. But this can be a wonderful way, once again, to take that power away and just expose the fear, expose it for what it is. It's just a made up thing. Now, I do want to acknowledge that I understand that I'm saying it's made up, but I also want to say that your fear is real. I want you to feel heard and acknowledged and seen because I have fears too. What we want to be careful of is making sure that those fears don't paralyze us. That's why this concept of acting as if or fake it till you make it, whatever you want to call it, helps us to move into whatever it is that we want to move into. Because let me tell you, as a recovering perfectionist, it is not going to happen if you think it has to be perfect. Done is better than perfect. That is some of the best advice that I ever got. Just getting it done. I'm guessing that many of you listening are perfectionists, or as I like to say, have a standard of excellence. Be excellencists. Well, I just made that up right now. It's not obviously not probably the most doesn't roll off the tongue as you would want. But think about reaching that level of excellence rather than perfection. And that can help really give yourself a break so that you don't get stuck and not do anything. Because I can tell you this also that starting a business during COVID, last July, I quit my job after 14 years and jumped right in. And man, there are so many things that I've had to learn from an online perspective. And if I had waited until everything was perfect, I would definitely not be where I am today. And it's amazing how you can think, oh, I don't want to put that out. Oh, no, no, no. And even today, for example, I scheduled an Instagram post because, well, I assumed I would get back to it. And then I forgot. And all of a sudden I got all these comments, which was great. But all I posted was a picture. I had no caption at all. So it's maybe sounds silly to you all, but I take my social media and my messaging seriously. So when I realized, oh my gosh, there's nothing there, I had to go back and fix it. But then I thought, you know what? If I had not scheduled it, I probably would have waited until tomorrow. And I wanted to get that out today. So it actually gave me the boost that I needed to then go back and edit. No big deal. It's not like the world was going to fall apart just because I didn't have a social media post. And I'm laughing as I'm saying this because it is so ridiculous when you think about everything that is going on in the world and how trite that really is. But a lot of times we can get very hung up with these things and then they make us go crazy because we're so fixated on them. So I want to come back again to the three things that we covered today. Tricking your brain related to this fake it till you make it, because if we're going to change a habit, we've got to recognize that it's going to feel awkward or maybe even uncomfortable, or certainly uncomfortable. Maybe it's even going to feel like this just isn't me. And I go back to, what version of yourself do you like better? That's why recording yourself on video, recording yourself on audio is so important to hear that, because you've got to be the judge. Don't listen to me or another coach. Listen to how it sounds. Do you like that version of yourself better? And if so, then keep that new habit. That's fantastic. And of course, you know, I'm biased. I'm going to recommend that you do speak with confidence and that you have great energy in your body posture and your voice and gestures and all those good things, as well as the wonderful pause. So all of these components that make up for an incredible communicator who will also be memorable. So that's one. Number two, be kind. Definitely have grace for yourself and recognize that these things do not happen overnight. So you've got to remember, you spent your whole life establishing these habits. They're not going to happen overnight. Make sure that you have grace. And then lastly, feel the fear and do it anyway. And if you need any support along the way, I am just an Instagram DM away, Facebook post away, email away, phone call away, text away. I would love to serve you if there's anything that I can do to help you. And in the meantime, I'm always grateful that you listen to my podcast or watch it for those of you watching on YouTube right now. I've always got some different background depending upon where I am and what's going on. And I am simply grateful to have you here today. And I hope that these tips helped you. So get out there, change those habits, and stand out with unshakable confidence. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laos. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laos. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.